Charles Sumner is an ancestor of mine. I decided that with the Sumner bicentennial happening this year that I would like to write a piece in honor of my distinguished ancestor. So I spent quite a bit of time, again, perusing biographies and sort of writing out of the emotional state that I found myself as I would read about his various ups and downs. Sumner was born on Beacon Hill, lived when he was there in Boston, lived on Beacon Hill all of his life. And his last residence, which was, I believe, about 30 years, his last 30 years, it was at 20 Hancock Street. And this is very interesting because it's literally a stone's throw from the Old West Church. And when I was doing my ministerial intern work, I was at the Old West Church for 4 years. Really didn't know that much about Sumner's background, certainly didn't know that he had lived essentially across the street from where I was working, and we were doing a lot of issues with social justice at the time. And then in the mid-70s became involved through the Jazz Coalition and with Arnie Cheatham in Arnie's program of jazz education, which became part of the desegregation situation of the time. Working on issues of desegregating Boston Public School and providing musical education through jazz, which is one of the great ways to bring black and white populations together. And again, very little conscious knowledge that here's this ancestor of mine who'd been working on this exact same issue back in the 1840s. I had this notion of the famous or infamous caning incident. So I came up with some fairly brutal chords to symbolize that. And I came across in my reading the fact that he had received something close to 30 blows. So I became quite literal here, and I made 30 of these chords. That was to be preceded by a very violent and brutal drum solo onto which the chords would be sort of superimposed. So it was those kinds of particular scenes, you could say, in the life and political biography that sort of leapt out. In this piece, it specifically calls for in the score for there to be silence for 2 or 3 seconds at the end of some of these, almost as if I'm asking the listener to reflect on what it is they've heard. Part of the story, as I was reading it anyway and getting an emotional reaction, was that it was a certain sense of, I don't want to say sadness, but a certain dolefulness, let me say. Sumner had a very full life, knew many of the key movers and shakers, we would say, of this period, was close friends with Abraham and Mrs. Lincoln, was a frequent visitor to the White House, was friends with Frederick Douglass, Wendell Phillips, other people. But it seemed that at some point he didn't get married until quite late in life, and that didn't work out. And he was close friends with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who may have been his best friend, was often a visitor at the Longfellow homestead. But there just seemed to be this sense that of sort of something, I don't want to say something missing, but something there that was maybe a bit of a cloud or something, and that for all of his political ups and downs, that there maybe was something there in the background. I mean, I have no way to verify this. This was just my emotional reaction. And then you have the caning incident, and that basically incapacitated him for 3 years, sent him on a search, a global search for medical treatment, and really contributed to various problems for the rest of his life. So something of that, I guess, was at the very beginning. So I begin with some chords that are very big and affirmative, and then sort of chords that are maybe a little more wistful. So that's where I'll play. It sort of goes like... sort of that idea, and then that continues. And then I found a quote by a man named William Curtis, who was just delivered as one of the eulogies for Sumner, and I thought the quote was very apt. It said, "He sounded the trumpet note of an ever higher endeavor." And so after this little passage goes on for another 2 or 3 chords, there's actually a solo trumpet line. Some other, so it's this sort of idea that I had in mind, being actually quite literal, which I often don't write things that are that literal, but I'm quite a bit inspired both by Duke Ellington and by Charles Ives. And Ives often wrote pieces of music that tried to interpret, as he said, the way things happened. As the piece was unfolding in our rehearsal, actually, that was the first time that I realized that maybe what I was trying to do, and again, this was unconscious, maybe what I was trying to do was build a monument or a statue, musically speaking, to Sumner. We know that there are 2 great statues, one in Harvard Square and one over on the Boston Common. And so I hadn't thought about this consciously, but I have occasionally visited those statues while I was in the process of writing and researching, just to sort of stand before the presence of this great person. One of the things that happened as I was writing the piece, I found that I wasn't able to find a specific melody that talked about any of these images, that it was more textural. You mentioned coloristic, so that depending on what instruments were being combined. There's a place where there's sort of a funeral procession idea where it goes to kind of a bluesy thing with 3 trombones and a baritone saxophone. But as I kept moving along, I found that there was sort of a big overarching melody that sort of emerged that I decided should come at the end. So it comes in small doses, so to speak, and then it eventually gets more and more power behind it, more and more instruments add into it. It goes higher and higher. And again, this notion of a trumpet note of ever higher endeavor, quotation, sort of informed that. So why don't I play just a little bit of that on the trumpet.